digging beneath my bedroom. My dad never let me own a phone. He'd already lost one son to an online predator, and he wasn't going to let it happen again. I tried to explain that I wasn't like Kyle. I didn't want to meet up with anyone from the internet. All I wanted was to message my friends and watch YouTube videos on the bus. But Dad wouldn't have it. Since Kyle disappeared, I barely left my room. When dinner was ready, I waited until Dad had finished eating before I grabbed my plate. Easier that way, without him watching. If I ate too slowly, he'd snap, "What? Not good enough for you." Before, Kyle used to redirect our old man's anger at himself, shielding me from the worst of it. He'd taken a beating once when I knocked over a can of red paint in the garage. Whenever someone asked about the purple bruise under his eye, he'd say it came from playing hockey. I never got the chance to thank him for that. I worked part-time bagging groceries at the Quick Mart and saved $200. One of my friends, Devin, sold me a cheap Motorola smartphone. I added people's socials, installed YouTube, Spotify, and a few other apps, and set up this Reddit profile. I couldn't risk Dad finding out the phone, so I pried up a floorboard in our bedroom, my bedroom, to hide it. I had to keep reminding myself of that. Without Kyle, there was no more our room, our desk, or our wardrobe. It was all mine, and that's all it would ever be. With steady internet access, my morbid curiosity got the better of me and I Googled Kyle's name. Recent articles popped up, and a headline on an obscure news site froze me. Father investigated in missing child's case. The photo showed Dad stepping in, or out, of his Lexus. Suddenly, his boots echoed on the staircase. I slid the phone back under the floorboards and hopped into bed, pulling the cover to my chin. Dad leaned in my doorway, slurring, "Good night, Bailey." Lately, I'd caught him hiding a flask of whiskey in his jacket. It hadn't been this bad since the early months of the divorce. "Good night, Dad," I replied, but a question escaped me. Is there any new information on Kyle? His expression sobered. "You know the rule. We don't talk about him. It's not for you to worry about." When he left, he kept the door ajar. I considered closing it, but if he went to the bathroom during the night and found it shut, he'd chew me out. I rolled onto my side and tried to sleep. I was beginning to drift off, my thoughts bleeding into hazy dreams, when the sound started. SCRTCH, SCRTCH, SCRTCH. It reminded me of nails on skin or a shovel in dirt. I looked down at the floorboard I'd hidden the phone under, and the scratching stopped, as if it were saying, "Yes, it's me. I'm here." Had I left Spotify playing by mistake? Carefully, I slipped from the bed and crouched by the floor, glancing at the door to be sure Dad wasn't watching. I pressed my ear to the boards and listened. SCRTCH, SCRTCH, SCRTCH. Then I recognized the sound. Fingers clawing through soil, as if something was climbing up from beneath the house. I jumped back into bed and closed my eyes, desperately trying to ignore the sound. It was an absurd thought, not one a rational mind interprets. Yet I couldn't bring myself to lift the floorboard and look inside. The next morning, I asked Dad what it could be. He had an immediate answer: rats. They'd probably nested in the walls and floor. One must have fallen into a gap and trapped itself. Night after night, the scraping continued. I wondered how long a rat could survive. 5 days? A week? By the end of 2 weeks, I knew it couldn't be a rat. The sounds grew louder, closer. At times, when there was no wind outside, I'd hear weak, whistling breaths creeping up from the floorboard. I forced myself to endure it for 2 more days, determined to block out the noises until they faded, until last night, when everything changed. The scratching began as usual around 2 or 3 in the morning, but after a few hours it stopped. Silence stretched, and for a peaceful moment I thought it may have stopped. But then the scraping resumed, rougher, fingernails against wood. The loose floorboard wobbled open as something shifted beneath. Too terrified to look, I grabbed a stack of textbooks and placed them onto the board. The wobbling ceased, but on the other side the scratching continued. I stayed awake until dawn, and at first light, I finally removed the textbooks and lifted the floorboard. Inside, my phone was gone, fallen into what had replaced it. An arm-sized hole leading into blackness. My heart pounded as I stared down the void, Without my phone, I had no light to shine inside and see how deep it was. So instead I leaned closer and hovered my ear over the hole. Breathing. The weak, whistling breaths I heard earlier, like the lungs were filled with dirt. My pulse quickened. Couldn't be true, it'd be ridiculous to even consider it, but I found myself confronting the possibility. Something was buried down there. At school the next day, I borrowed Devon's phone and called my number. Devon gave a short laugh. You think the thing in the hole knows how to use a phone? The phone rang 7 times, then clicked as someone answered. Hello, I whispered. A voice I knew all too well, Kyle's voice, crackled through the static. Don't trust him.